Hello everyone. In this video we are going to show how a market is impacted when you impose a price control using a technique that helps us break down where things go, what happened to different things. And we're going to use some letters to represent different areas on our market model. So let's start out with an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. We already know how to measure consumer surplus. Right? Consumer surplus is the area beneath the demand curve and above the price that buyers pay. So that entire blue triangle represents consumer surplus if we don't interfere in the market. For producer surplus, it's the area beneath the price that sellers get and above the supply curve. So this orange triangle represents producer surplus. Well, let's see what happens if we impose a price control on this market. So let's do this. Here is our price control. Price control. Now, pause this video for just a minute and ask yourself whether this is a price ceiling or a price floor. Did you say price ceiling? If you did, you are correct. How can you tell? Well, a price ceiling is a maximum legal price, right? So if we put a price above the equilibrium price, that would be a price floor. So this is a price ceiling. Now let's figure out what the quantity that will be exchanged in this market is. Well, at this price, right, this is where this intersects the supply curve. That is the quantity that will actually be sold because that's all the suppliers are willing to give. Right? So that is our new quantity. Right? And that is the price that both the buyer and seller will be paying. Right? Well, let's see how that impacted the seller of the good. Well, before the tax, before the price control, the orange triangle represented their producer surplus. Now they only get the green triangle. Well, who's going to benefit from this? Well, in one way you can think about this is, well, what if you were able to get something for cheaper than before? Intuitively, you would like to be able to pay less for something, so probably you'll be the one who benefits. And we can see this in this map or this model too. Going straight up to the demand curve, that is the amount that buyers would be willing to pay for that quantity. So the buyer who was willing to buy that quantity was actually willing to pay not just what the price control was, not even what the market price was. They were willing to pay even more for that. So let's look at where our consumer surplus is now. It's the area beneath the demand curve and above the price that they actually pay for the quantity that is actually sold. So that looks like quite a different shape than before. Before we just had triangles. So let's do a little trick using some letters to break these different areas down. So let's call this W, X, Y, and let's see, R, S, and T. That way we're not using P or Q or anything. We don't want to get those letters mixed up. Let's break it down. Before the price control, consumer surplus was the letters W, X, and Y. And after the price control, consumer surplus is W, X, and R. Well, let's think about the producers. Producer surplus before was R, R, S, and T, and producer surplus after is just T. Now the reason why we're using these letters is we could easily see what was given to consumers and what was taken away from producers. So before, R, S, and T were all part of producer surplus. T is all that remains. So what happened to R and S? Well, R, that's now part of consumer surplus. This area here represents the welfare that was reallocated to buyers away from sellers as a result of this price ceiling. And, well, what happened to S? Well, S is deadweight loss. This is the welfare loss to all of these participants in the market, all of these sellers in the market who now are not participating anymore because of the price control. So what happened with consumer surplus? Well, W and X are still parts of consumer surplus, but they lost Y and gained R. Right? The R was taken away from producer surplus, and this Y is our deadweight loss. Y represents the welfare loss to all of the buyers who no longer participate in the market. So all these guys here in W, X, and Y, X and R, right, they're still in the market, they're still enjoying this good and enjoying it at a lower price, but these guys here, they're out of the market now. Let's use the same technique and look at a price floor. So we're going to use the same technique of breaking the areas down into letters so that we can talk more about how welfare is reallocated as a result of a price control. So again, before the price control, let's use that blue triangle to represent consumer surplus, and an orange triangle to represent producer surplus. Now let's impose a price floor, a minimum legal price. Okay. Now we can use that intersection to find the quantity that will now be exchanged in this market. And this point here, going straight down from that intersection to our other curve, that tells us the amount that sellers would have needed in order to sell that amount, the minimum amount that they would be willing to sell that quantity for. So now we've got our areas blocked off here. And let's use the same letters, W, X, and Y, R, S, T. So let's break it down again. Consumer surplus before the price control is W, X, and Y, and the consumer surplus after the price control, remember, that is the area beneath the demand curve and above the price that is actually being paid at the quantity that is actually being sold. Well, our consumer surplus after is just W. Let's do the same for our producers. Our producer surplus before is R, S, and T, and our producer surplus after is the area beneath the price that sellers get above their supply curve at the quantity that is actually sold. So after, our producer surplus is X, R, and T. So let's look at what changed. For the consumers, they lose X and Y. Let's figure out where X went. Well, X is now part of producer surplus. So X represents the welfare that was reallocated away from buyers of this good to the seller, and Y represents that deadweight loss. This is the welfare loss to the buyers who are no longer able to get this good because there aren't people willing to sell it at that price. Let's look at producers. Producer surplus before was R, S, and T. So what's different? They still have R and T, and they gained X from the consumers, but S is gone. S is the producer surplus that is lost due to the price control from the sellers who no longer participate in that market. Right? So it just disappears. Okay, good luck on your content engagement, and hopefully this will help you understand how to do that a little bit better.